The scorching desert sun was the silent accomplice to an act of unimaginable cruelty. A wealthy grandson, his heart as barren as the landscape, dragged his elderly grandmother into the middle of nowhere and with his own hands buried her alive in the scalding sand, leaving only her face exposed to the solar inferno. He drove off in his luxury car, convinced that nature would do the dirty work, erasing any trace of his crime. Hours dragged on, each grain of sand a torment, each breath of wind a promise of the end, but the desert held its own secrets and its own justice. Suddenly, an imposing silhouette appeared on the horizon. An elephant, majestic and solitary, approached. With a surprising delicacy for its size, it began to dig the sand around the elderly woman, carefully freeing her. Then with its trunk, it offered her fresh water, an oasis of life amidst the desolation. The elephant then turned towards the cowardly grandson's luxury car, which had returned to check the result of his wickedness. With a silent but overwhelming fury, the beast of nature destroyed the vehicle, crushing the metal like paper. The scene attracted attention, and the grandson, caught red-handed and with no escape, was immediately arrested, confronted not only by the law, but by the relentless and just fury of nature. The desert air, once a silent accomplice to cruelty, now vibrated with the arrival of sudden, relentless justice. Lucas, the wealthy grandson, felt the cold metal of handcuffs on his wrists, a chilling contrast to the scorching heat that still enveloped him. His eyes, once full of arrogance and contempt, now reflected a mix of shock, fury, and a dread he never imagined feeling. His luxury car, a symbol of his power and impunity, lay a few feet away, a twisted pile of metal and shattered glass, a silent testament to nature's wrath. And there, majestic and imposing, the elephant remained, a silent giant, observing the scene with an ancient wisdom that seemed to transcend time. Police officers, drawn by the commotion and the surreal sight of an elephant beside a destroyed car in the middle of nowhere, acted quickly. Lucas tried to argue, to stammer flimsy excuses, but the evidence was glaring. His grandmother, Donna Ilara, being supported by one of the officers, still covered in sand, but alive, and the unmistakable trail of his attempted murder. The image of the elephant, which now seemed like a mystical guardian, was the most unbelievable piece of a puzzle no one would ever expect to assemble. Donna Ilara, in turn, felt life slowly return to her exhausted body. The fresh water from the elephant's trunk had been a miracle, a balm for her dry throat and desperate soul. Now, as paramedics examined her, she looked at Lucas. There was no hatred in her gaze, only a deep sadness, a disappointment that weighed more than all the desert sand. Her own blood, her own flesh, had tried to erase her from existence. But nature, in its infinite and unpredictable wisdom, had intervened. The elephant, her silent savior, tilted its head slightly in her direction, almost like a respectful farewell, before turning and beginning to walk away, its imposing silhouette diminishing on the horizon, leaving behind only the dust and the echo of a miracle. Lucas was led away, his voice choked with empty protests and threats that now sounded pathetic. The reality of prison, public humiliation, and the end of his privileged life began to set in. He couldn't understand. How could an animal, a simple elephant, have ruined his perfect plan? The image of the destroyed car, of his grandmother alive, and of the grey giant watching him with eyes as ancient as the desert, replayed in his mind like a vivid nightmare. The news spread like wildfire. Wealthy grandson buries grandmother alive in desert. Elephant saves her and destroys attacker's car. The headlines were sensational, the images shocking. The story of Donna Ilara and her pachyderm savior captured the world's imagination. The elephant of justice became an instant icon, a symbol of divine retribution or nature's fury against human cruelty. While Lucas was processed and thrown into a cold cell, far from the luxury and comfort he had always known, Donna Ilara was taken to a hospital. Physically exhausted, but mentally stronger than ever, she refused to be a victim. The experience had transformed her, instilling in her a fierce resilience and a new perspective on life and death. She had looked into the abyss and been pulled back by a being many would consider irrational, but who had shown more humanity than her own grandson. The story of Donna Ilara and the elephant was not just news, it was a legend in the making, a cautionary tale of hope. The desert, once the scene of a heinous crime, had become the stage for a miracle, a reminder that nature, in its vastness and mystery, holds its own form of justice. And the world was now eager to know what would happen next, both with the cowardly grandson and with the grandmother who defied death and found salvation in such an improbable place. Tension hung in the air, as thick as desert dust, promising that the saga was just beginning. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a clang that echoed not just in the cell, but in Lucas's soul. The dry, final sound was the epitaph of his freedom, the prelude to a private hell he never imagined. The grey walls, the smell of disinfectant and despair, the thin mattress on the concrete floor. Everything was a brutal shock for someone who had only known silk sheets and panoramic views. He sat, or rather collapsed, in the farthest corner, the handcuffs already removed, but the feeling of imprisonment still vivid on his wrists. The initial fury, that blind rage against the animal, against his grandmother, against the universe that conspired against him, began to give way to a cold, paralyzing fear. Outside, the world buzzed. The story of the Elephant of Justice had spread like a digital virus, going viral on all platforms, newspapers and news reports. Amateur videos of the destroyed car, photos of Donna Ilara being rescued, and even grainy images of the elephant walking away became global icons. The desert, once a forgotten place, was now the epicenter of a narrative that blended human cruelty, animal miracle, and cosmic retribution. Donna Ilara, however, was in a different universe. In the aseptic silence of the hospital room, she tried to process not only the physical pain of dehydration and exposure, but the emotional trauma of having been left to die by her own grandson. Doctors and nurses treated her with an almost religious reverence, whispering about the miracle she represented. She drank the offered water, each sip a reminder of the elephant's cool trunk, a stark contrast to the dryness of the sand and the barrenness of Lucas's heart. There was no hatred, only deep exhaustion and a persistent question. How could someone do this? While Lucas tried to adjust to his new grim reality, his family's legal team was already in action, not to defend him against the undeniable charge of attempted murder, but to control the damage, to shape the narrative, to minimize the public shame falling upon the family name. But it was a losing battle. Public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Lucas was the villain, and the elephant, the unexpected hero. The prosecution, in turn, saw Lucas's case as a golden opportunity, not just to deliver justice, but to send a powerful message. Cruelty against the elderly, the arrogance of the privileged, impunity, all of it would be fought with the full rigor of the law. The prosecutor in charge, a man of firm principles and impeccable reputation, promised that Lucas would face the most severe consequences for his actions. At the hospital, Donna Ilara began to receive visitors, not just distant relatives who reappeared, but journalists from all over the world, eager for her story. She, however, remained reserved. The experience had taught her to be wary, to protect her newfound peace, but there was something she needed to do, something she felt she owed her savior. She asked to speak with the officers who rescued her, not to talk about Lucas, but to ask about the elephant. Where was it? Was it safe? The answer was evasive. The elephant had disappeared as mysteriously as it appeared. No one knew where it came from or where it went. Some suggested it was a solitary wild elephant, others that it had escaped from a distant sanctuary or circus. But for Donna Ilara, it was more than an animal. It was a manifestation, a guardian angel. Its absence left a void, a feeling that the story was not yet complete. Lucas, in his cell, began to feel the weight of solitude. His friends disappeared, his influential contacts fell silent. Money, which had always been his armor and his weapon, was useless there. With each passing hour, the reality of what he had done became clearer, more nauseating. He had not only tried to kill his grandmother, he had become a global pariah, a symbol of everything wrong with wealth without character. The image of the elephant, once an irritation, now haunted his dreams, a grey giant watching him with eyes of judgment. Tension mounted not only in the courts and media, but within Lucas's own family. The scandal threatened to dismantle an empire built over generations. Accusations and recriminations flew among relatives, some trying to disassociate themselves from Lucas, others seeking a way to mitigate the disaster. What Lucas had done was not just a crime, it was a betrayal that reverberated throughout the structure of power and privilege that sustained him. Donna Ilara, observing the chaos from afar, felt a strange calm. She had been buried alive, but reborn. Life, for her, was no longer about possessions or status, but about breath, water, the unexpected kindness of a gentle giant. She knew Lucas's legal battle would be long and painful, but for her, justice had already been served in the desert, under the relentless sun, by the hands of a being who knew no human malice, only the law of nature. And that was a justice no court could replicate, or even annul. The saga was far from over. But the first and most important chapter of retribution had already been written in the desert sand. The trial was approaching, and with it, the inevitable confrontation with the woman he tried to erase, and with the legend he had unwittingly created. The silence of the cell, once a new torment, was now the constant sound of his own ruin. Lucas, huddled in the darkest corner, felt the walls closing in, not just physically but mentally. With each passing day, the image of the elephant became more vivid in his mind, not as an irritation, but as a silent executioner. The ancient eyes of the pachyderm, which once observed him with a disturbing calm, now haunted his dreams, a constant reminder of the justice he had tried to avoid and from which he could not escape. The luxury that defined him, the dinners, the parties, the travels, everything was a distant mirage, replaced by the harsh reality of concrete and iron. He clung to fragments of his past, trying to understand how the life he so despised in his grandmother had become his own. As Lucas languished in prison, the world outside continued to spin, but in a way he could never have foreseen. The elephant of justice had transcended mere headlines, becoming a global cultural phenomenon. Its story was told and retold in every language, inspiring songs, works of art, and even an animal protection movement that used the elephant's image as its symbol. The internet exploded with theories about its origin, a mystical guardian, an animal trained for rescues, or simply a miracle of nature. To the public, the elephant was the personification of hope, kindness, and retribution, a perfect counterpoint to Lucas's cruelty. At the hospital, Donna Ilara observed this frenzy with a serenity that surprised everyone. Her physical recovery progressed, but the emotional scars were deep. She refused interviews, shied away from cameras and microphones, preferring the quiet of her room. To her, the elephant was not a symbol, but a living being, a friend who had extended a hand, or rather a trunk, to her in the darkest moment of her life. With every sip of water, every breath, she felt gratitude, a silent debt that propelled her. "Is it okay?" she incessantly asked the doctors and nurses, her voice weak but laden with genuine concern. Did anyone find it? The lack of answers was a small torment in her newfound peace. She felt that her story would not be complete until she knew her savior was safe. Meanwhile, Lucas's family was in total collapse. The empire, built on generations of cunning and influence, now disintegrated under the weight of the scandal. Renowned lawyers, the most expensive money could buy, were hired not to defend Lucas's innocence, a farce no one would believe, but to try to stem the bleeding of reputation and finances. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, turning into battlegrounds filled with accusations, shouts, and the bitter realization that money and power could not buy public forgiveness. Distant relatives rushed to issue disassociation statements, fearing Lucas's stain would reach them. The family name, once synonymous with success and influence, was now synonymous with cruelty and arrogance. The pressure for Lucas to accept a plea bargain was immense, a desperate attempt to save what remained of the family's image. But the prosecutor was inflexible. The prosecutor, a man of firm principles and impeccable reputation, saw Lucas's case not only as an opportunity to bring justice to Donna Ilara, but as a chance to send an unequivocal message to society. The impunity of the rich had come to an end. He was building a meticulous case, with Donna Ilara's irrefutable testimony, forensic evidence from the crime scene, and of course the unbelievable story of the elephant as a backdrop. He knew the world was watching, and he was determined to show that the law was, in fact, equal for all. The prosecution was ready to expose every detail of Lucas's heinous plan, every layer of his arrogance, so that the maximum penalty would be applied. The tension, once a distant murmur, now resonated like a war drum, echoing through the corridors of the judicial system and the hearts of millions. The official announcement of Lucas's trial date was the spark that ignited the already volatile media landscape. The entire world, mesmerized by the saga of the Elephant of Justice, held its breath, awaiting the clash between cruelty and resilience, between the arrogance of power and the inscrutable wisdom of nature. In the cold, damp cell, Lucas felt the ground give way beneath his feet. The news of the trial, delivered by a guard with ill-disguised contempt, was the final blow to his already fragile sanity. The walls, once merely physical barriers, now seemed to close in, suffocating him with the weight of his own wickedness. The smell of disinfectant and despair permeated the air, a cruel contrast to the expensive perfumes and air conditioning of his former life. His lawyers, once imposing figures full of empty promises, now seemed desperate, their voices lower, their arguments weaker. They visited him frequently, not to offer comfort, but to pressure him to accept a plea bargain, a confession that they claimed would save what was left of the family name. But Lucas, in his pathological stubbornness, refused to admit guilt. To him, guilt was an invention, a concept for the weak. He had been caught, yes, but he wasn't guilty. He was a victim of circumstances, of luck, of that damn elephant. The image of the elephant, however, was an implacable judge. Its ancient eyes, once just an uncomfortable memory, were now a constant presence, watching him from every shadow, from every dark corner of his cell. They pursued him in his nightmares, in his waking moments, reminding him of the strength he had underestimated, of the life he had tried to extinguish, and which, ironically, had been saved by a creature he considered inferior. The luxury of his past life was now a torture, a stark contrast to the misery of his present. He clung to any vestige of his old self, but each day, reality pulled him deeper into the abyss of his own making. The mirror in his cell, when he dared to look, revealed a stranger. Bloodshot eyes, unshaven beard, an expression of terror and despair he didn't recognize. The wealthy grandson, the arrogant heir, had vanished, replaced by a broken man, haunted by a pachyderm. It was this quest, this need to reciprocate, that prompted her to make a surprising decision. She agreed to testify, not to get revenge on Lucas, not to see her grandson rot in prison, but to tell the full story, to give a voice to the elephant so that the world would understand the depth of the connection between all living creatures. Her intention was pure, devoid of any rancor. She would speak for truth, for life, and for the miracle that saved her. On the day of the trial, the city was in an uproar. Crowds gathered in the streets adjacent to the courthouse. Television cameras from all over the globe broadcast live, and the anticipation was almost palpable. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged. Lucas, visibly thinner and paler, was led into the room. His eyes swept the environment, searching for a familiar face, a sign of support, but found only looks of repulsion and curiosity. Then he saw her, Donna Ilara, sitting in the front row next to the prosecutor. Her posture was erect. Her eyes, though marked by experience, radiated a calm that disarmed him. There was no hatred, only a deep quietude. The air in the room grew denser. The judge entered, and a heavy silence fell upon everyone. The gavel struck, and the trial of Lucas, the wealthy grandson who tried to bury his grandmother alive in the desert, was about to begin. The final confrontation between the darkness of a human heart and the light of a miracle of nature was underway. The saga was about to enter its most dramatic chapter, where the truth, however unbelievable, would finally be revealed. The silence in the courtroom was so dense it seemed to suck the air from one's lungs. The sound of the judge's gavel, dry and final, reverberated like a starting gun. The entire world, connected by fiber optics and radio waves, held its breath. It wasn't just a trial, it was a referendum on the human soul, an epic confrontation between darkness and light. The prosecutor, a man of modest stature but with a presence that filled the room, rose. His eyes, sharp and determined, swept the room, fixing for an instant on Lucas, then on Donna Ilara, and finally on the audience, as if to ensure everyone understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. His voice, when he began to speak, was calm, but laden with a gravity that silenced any murmur. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice echoing with clarity, "today you will not merely be judging a man. You will be witnessing a story that defies comprehension, a story that forces us to look into the abyss of human cruelty and to the heights of the most unexpected compassion." He painted a vivid picture, but without unnecessary flourishes, of the fateful morning. He described Donna Ilara's fragility, the trust she placed in her grandson, and the brutal betrayal that followed. The image of an elderly woman, buried alive under the merciless desert sun, was evoked with a precision that made many in the room wince. Lucas, in his chair, felt a chill, but his face remained a mask of defiance, a stubborn denial that barely concealed the tremor in his hands. "This man," the prosecutor continued, pointing at Lucas with a gesture that was not accusatory but declarative, believed that money and power made him untouchable. He believed he could extinguish a life, a history, a legacy to satisfy his own greed. He dug a grave for his grandmother, not just in the sand, but in the heart of human decency. Tension mounted with each word. The prosecutor then introduced the element that had transformed the case into a global legend. But the desert, ladies and gentlemen, holds secrets and miracles. And it was there, at the height of despair, that nature intervened. Not a man, not a rescue team, but an elephant. A being that, in its ancestral wisdom, recognized life where humanity had sown death. He described the rescue, the fresh water from the trunk, the destruction of Lucas's luxury car, each detail a stab at the defendant's armor of arrogance. "This elephant," the prosecutor concluded, with a tone bordering on reverence, "not only saved Donna Ilara, it exposed the truth. It became a beacon of justice for all of us." The defense, led by a renowned lawyer known for his sharp oratory and ability to sow doubt, rose next. His demeanor was one of calculated calm, a deliberate contrast to the prosecutor's passion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice soft, almost conciliatory. "The prosecutor has presented you with a story. A story, I must admit, moving and worthy of a fairy tale. But we are in a court of law, not a theatre. Here, we deal with facts, with irrefutable evidence, not with legends or with what the internet, in its infinite imagination, decides to create." He paused, allowing his words to settle. Lucas watched him with renewed hope, a glimpse that perhaps, just perhaps, the lawyer could dismantle that farce. "My client, Lucas, is a young man who made mistakes, yes, errors in judgment, in temperament, perhaps even recklessness. But he is not the monster the prosecution tries to paint. And the story you've heard, however dramatic, lacks something fundamental, concrete evidence directly linking it to my client in the way it was described." The defense lawyer began to sow the seeds of doubt. An elderly lady, in a state of shock, dehydrated under the scorching desert sun. It's understandable that her perception of events might have been altered, that the line between reality and delirium might become tenuous. An elephant that appears out of nowhere, digs in the sand, offers water and destroys a car. With all due respect to the esteemed Dona Ilara and her incredible recovery, we must ask ourselves, is this a fact or a fantasy created by a traumatized mind? He argued that there were no human witnesses to Lucas's alleged act, that the destroyed car could have been the result of an accident, of vandals, of anything less than the miraculous intervention of a pachyderm. The media, in its pursuit of sensationalism, has turned a tragic incident into a circus. But the jury cannot be swayed by headlines or social media campaigns. You must adhere to the law, to logic, to what can be proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Donna Ilara, seated in the front row, listened to everything with an almost supernatural serenity. The defense lawyer's words did not faze her. She knew the truth, and she knew that soon she would have the chance to tell it. Her gaze met Lucas's for a brief moment. There was no condemnation, only a deep sadness, a lament for her grandson's lost soul. Lucas, on the other hand, felt the air grow thinner. His lawyer's words were a temporary balm, but the image of the elephant, relentless, still lingered in his mind. He looked at Ilara, expecting to see anger, hatred, but found only a disturbing calm. That calm was more frightening than any shout, any accusation. She was the embodiment of the truth he desperately tried to bury. The judge, in his grave voice, called the first witness. The saga was just beginning. The truth, however unbelievable, would be unveiled layer by layer, under the watchful eyes of a world that yearned for justice. The final confrontation between the darkness of a human heart and the light of a miracle of nature had been officially opened. The stage was set, the actors in their places, and humanity's verdict awaited. The judge's call for the first witness echoed in the room, which seemed to have sucked all the oxygen out. Every gaze turned to the side door, from which emerged a man in uniform, Sergeant Almeida, of the Desert Patrol. His posture was serious, his face weathered by the sun, a silent testament to the vast and merciless lands he patrolled. He walked to the witness stand, took the oath in a firm voice, and sat down, his eyes fixed on the prosecutor. The prosecutor, with calculated calm, began his questioning. "Sergeant Almeida, please describe to the court the circumstances of your discovery on August 14th in the eastern sector of the desert." The sergeant's voice, though monotone, painted a vivid and terrifying picture. "We received an alert from a GPS signal in a remote area. Upon arrival, we found a luxury vehicle, a high-end SUV, completely destroyed. It appeared to have been crushed by something of immense force. Nearby, about 10 meters away, there was a small elevation in the sand, and upon investigating, we found Dona Ilara partially buried. A murmur swept through the room, quickly silenced by the judge's stern gaze. Lucas, in his chair, clenched his fists. The sergeant's description was a cold mirror of the reality he tried to erase. "Can you describe Donna Ilara's condition?" the prosecutor asked. She was in severe shock, dehydrated with sunburns. Her eyes were open, but seemed fixed on something distant. She murmured words, something about sand and an elephant. Initially, we thought it was delirium due to extreme dehydration. The sergeant paused, and his voice took on a tone of regret. It was a miracle she was alive. The temperature that day exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. The prosecutor nodded, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. "Sergeant, did you find anyone else at the scene? Any signs of a struggle or another vehicle?" "No, sir. Only the destroyed car and Donna Ilara. The sand around was disturbed in an unusual way, but there were no human footprints other than ours, and later those of the rescue teams." The prosecutor's strategy was clear. Establish the crime scene, the victim's condition, and the absence of any conventional explanation for what had happened, preparing the ground for the unbelievable part of the story. He wanted the jury to feel the desolation and mystery before presenting the solution. It was the defense's turn. Lucas's lawyer, with his soft, confident voice, rose. "Sergeant Almeida, a simple question. Did you see an elephant at the scene?" The sergeant hesitated for a moment. "No, sir. There was no visible elephant when we arrived." "And can you state with certainty that the car was destroyed by an elephant?" The lawyer continued, an almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I cannot state with certainty the exact cause of the destruction, only that the force involved was extraordinary, and that it did not appear to be the result of a common traffic accident or human vandalism." "So, is it possible that the car was destroyed by a natural phenomenon, such as a violent sandstorm, or perhaps by some kind of heavy equipment that left no clear traces?" The lawyer's voice was almost a whisper, but laden with insinuation. The sergeant frowned. "It's improbable, but I cannot entirely rule out other possibilities without further evidence." "And what about Donna Ilara's words about an elephant? You yourself said you considered it delirium, correct?" "Yes, sir. At that moment, given the circumstances, it was the most logical explanation for someone in her condition." The defense was planting the seeds of doubt, trying to discredit the most fantastical part of the story, and by extension, Donna Ilara's credibility as an eyewitness. Lucas felt a small relief, a thread of hope. Perhaps the lawyer could, in fact, transform the elephant story into a hallucination, a fable. Donna Ilara, however, remained impassive. Her eyes followed the sergeant, then the lawyer, without any sign of disturbance. She knew what had happened. The truth needed no external validation for her. Her serenity was a shield against insinuations, a silent force that radiated through the courtroom. The prosecutor, in his rebuttal, tried to reinforce the uniqueness of the scene. "Sergeant, in your years of service patrolling the desert, have you ever encountered a situation similar to this? A person semi-buried, a luxury vehicle completely destroyed by an unknown force, and no other human being in sight?" The sergeant slowly shook his head. "No, sir, never. It was unique." The word unique hung in the air, a reminder that even if the defense tried to demystify it, the scene itself was extraordinary. The judge thanked the sergeant, who stepped down from the witness stand, leaving behind a trail of raw facts and unsettling questions. The next step would be crucial. The prosecutor needed to fill the gaps, connect Lucas to that desolate scene, and somehow prepare the jury for the story that defied logic. The room was in a state of suspension, each jury member weighing the words, the insinuations, the partial truths. The battle for the narrative was just beginning, and silence was the battlefield where truth and doubt clashed. The world watched anxious as justice tried to unravel the impossible. The next witness would be the key to untying the knot of incredulity, to bring the jury one step closer to accepting the miracle or rejecting it as mere fantasy. The stage was set for the next revelation, and the air was charged with anticipation. The judge's call for the next witness broke the tense silence, like crystal shattering in the air. This time, it wasn't a man of the desert, but a woman with a serious demeanor, dressed in an impeccable suit and thin-rimmed glasses. Dr. Sofia Mendez, a specialist in vehicle telemetry and digital forensic analysis, walked with firm steps to the witness stand. Her presence radiated an authority based not on brute force, but on the relentless coldness of data. She took the oath, her voice clear and without hesitation, and sat down, her eyes meeting the prosecutor's with professional expectation. The prosecutor, with a small smile of satisfaction, knew this was the piece that would begin to fit the puzzle. Dr. Mendez, you were tasked with analyzing the telemetric data and GPS system of the luxury vehicle found in the desert on August 14th, correct? Correct, Mr. Prosecutor, she replied, her voice neutral, technical. The vehicle in question, an Apex Motors Titan model SUV, was equipped with an advanced tracking system and a data black box, similar to those found in aircraft, which records a wide range of operational information. Could you please describe what your analysis revealed about the vehicle's route and activities on the day in question? Dr. Mendez adjusted her glasses. Our data shows that the vehicle departed from a residence in the city's upscale area around 8:30 a.m. It followed a route that took it directly eastward, entering the desert region. Around 10:15 a.m., the vehicle arrived at a remote area, precisely the coordinates where Donna Ilara was later found by Sergeant Almeida. She paused, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The car remained parked at that location for approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes. During this period, the data indicates that the engine was turned off and on multiple times, and there were records of the driver's door, the front passenger door, and notably the trunk being opened and closed. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The trunk. He had used the trunk to transport Ilara to the desert under the pretext of a drive. The coldness of those words, the precision of the data, were more terrifying than any passionate accusation. It was the truth, raw and stark, emerging from a computer chip. And what happened after that period, Dr. Mendez? The prosecutor asked, letting the gravity of the revelation sink in. After 1 hour and 20 minutes, the vehicle was started again and began to move. However, the telemetry data became erratic. There was a sudden and drastic alteration in the impact sensors, indicating a collision or a series of high-magnitude impacts. The safety systems were abruptly deactivated and data transmission ceased completely at 11:40 a.m. at the same location where the vehicle was found destroyed. The prosecutor nodded, a triumphant look in his eyes. Dr. Mendez, based on your experience and the analyzed data, can you offer an opinion on the nature of the vehicle's destruction? Yes, sir. The magnitude and nature of the recorded impacts are consistent with an overwhelming force, not a common traffic accident. There is no evidence of skidding, sudden braking, or collision with another vehicle. The destruction is localized and deep, as if the vehicle had been subjected to repeated and directed blows by something of considerable weight and force. It's a type of damage we rarely see, except in very specific scenarios. The defense rose for cross-examination, Lucas's lawyer desperately trying to shift the focus. Dr. Mendez, can you state with certainty that my client, Lucas, was the driver of the vehicle that day, and the telemetric data records the key used to start the vehicle, which was associated with the owner's profile, Mr. Lucas? While there is no internal video camera for facial identification, the correlation between the key, the user profile, and the driving pattern is strong. But it's not irrefutable proof of his physical presence behind the wheel, is it? The lawyer insisted. Someone else could have used my client's key, couldn't they? Dr. Mendez maintained her composure. It is theoretically possible, but highly improbable, considering the remote nature of the location and the absence of any other individual or vehicle registered nearby, according to satellite data and Sergeant Almeida's reports. And what about the destruction of the vehicle? The lawyer continued, his voice taking on a skeptical tone. You mentioned overwhelming force. Could it have been an unusually severe sandstorm, or perhaps an object falling from an airplane, a meteorite? Dr. Mendez shook her head. There are no records of sandstorms of that magnitude in the vicinity at that time, and the analysis of impact patterns is inconsistent with a vertical object fall. The damage is horizontal and lateral, with deformations suggesting repeated pressure and impact from a large, irregular surface, as if something was crushing and tearing the metal. Lucas felt cold sweat trickle down his back. Dr. Mendez's words, so technical and dispassionate, painted a picture he recognized with growing terror. The large, irregular surface crushing the metal. The image of the elephant, with its powerful trunk and feet, invaded his mind, suffocating him. Donna Ilara, in the front row, watched Dr. Mendez with a look of recognition. Science was, in some way, beginning to validate the impossible. Her calm was no longer just serenity, but a silent confirmation that the truth, however fantastic, was being revealed. The prosecutor, in his rebuttal, asked Dr. Mendez one final question. Dr. Mendez, in all your experience with vehicle damage analysis, have you ever seen a pattern of destruction as specific and unusual as this? Never, Mr. Prosecutor, she replied, her voice a little more emphatic. This is, without a doubt, the most singular case of vehicle destruction I have ever analyzed. The characteristics of the damage are unique. The word unique echoed in the room again, this time with even greater weight. The sergeant had said the same. The defense had tried to discredit the elephant story as delirium, but forensic science was now pointing to an extraordinary force, inexplicable by conventional means. The stage was set for the next revelation, and the air was charged with anticipation. The truth was slowly unfolding, layer by layer, and each new piece of evidence, however technical, seemed to whisper the same unbelievable story. The jury, once skeptical, now seemed divided between logic and the growing possibility of a miracle. The judge's call echoed through the room, but this time it wasn't for a data expert or a man of the law. The prosecution may call its next witness. The prosecutor, with a look that held the gravity of the entire case, rose. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Donna Ilara Vasconcelos. A murmur swept through the courtroom. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the heart of the story. Donna Ilara, with her erect and dignified posture, rose from the front row. There was no hesitation in her steps as she walked towards the witness stand, her eyes fixed on the prosecutor, then on the judge, and for a brief instant on Lucas's eyes, who looked away, pale. She took the oath with a clear and firm voice, which belied her age, and sat down, radiating a calm that seemed to defy the very nature of what she was about to reveal. The prosecutor began softly, building the narrative carefully. Donna Ilara, can you please state your full name and age? Ilara Vasconcelos. I am 82 years old, she replied, her voice resonating with surprising clarity. And do you know the defendant, Lucas Montero? Yes, he is my grandson, she said, without apparent emotion, but with an implicit weight in those words. Could you please tell us, in your own words, what happened on August 14th, Donna Ilara, starting from the moment Mr. Lucas invited you out? Donna Ilara closed her eyes for an instant, as if reliving every second. Lucas appeared at my house that morning, around 8 o'clock. He said he wanted to take me for a drive to see the desert flowers which were in full bloom. I was happy, as he rarely visited me. I thought it was a gesture of affection. The room was in absolute silence, every person hanging on her words. He helped me into the car, a large, luxurious SUV. We talked a little at first about trivial things, but as we drove further from the city, the desert became more inhospitable and the conversation ceased. I realized we weren't going where the flowers usually bloom. I asked him, but he just gave me an evasive answer. She paused and her voice hardened slightly. We arrived at a very isolated spot. There was nothing but sand and some rocks. He stopped the car, turned off the engine. I asked what we were doing there. He then told me, with a coldness I never imagined he possessed, that I was a burden, that I was spending the family's money, and that it was time for me to disappear. A shiver ran down the spines of many in the courtroom. Lucas was visibly uncomfortable, his face contorted in a grimace of guilt and despair. He forced me out of the car. I tried to resist, but he is young and strong. He pushed me to the ground and started digging with a shovel he had in the trunk. I begged, I cried, but he didn't stop. He threw me into the hole and started covering me with sand. Donna Ilara's voice, though firm, carried the vivid memory of terror. The sand got into my eyes, into my mouth. I couldn't breathe properly. I thought it was my end. The last thing I saw before being completely covered was his face, devoid of any remorse, just a cold determination. The prosecutor waited for the emotion to settle. And then, Donna Ilara, what happened after you were buried? Darkness, silence, the weight of the sand. I was dying. I knew it. But then I began to feel a vibration in the ground, a sound. A deep sound, like a distant drum, approaching, and then the ground began to tremble. I felt the sand above me move, loosen. I thought it was an earthquake or that I was delirious. She looked at the jury, her eyes conveying an unwavering conviction. But it wasn't delirium. The sand began to be removed from me, not all at once, but carefully, in mounds. I felt the air again, a fresh breath. And when my eyes opened, I saw the most magnificent creature that ever existed. An elephant, she declared, the word hanging in the air like an undeniable truth. A huge elephant with majestic tusks was there above me. It was using its trunk to dig the sand to free me, with a delicacy I would never expect from such a large animal. The jury was in shock. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances. The story of the sergeant and Dr. Mendez, with its overwhelming force and large irregular surface, now gained a face, a form. He pulled me out of the hole. I was weak, dehydrated, and then he did something that defied all logic. He extended his trunk to me, and fresh water flowed from it, pure, crystalline water. I drank. It was the most delicious water I had ever tasted. He saved me. Lucas, in the defendant's box, was ashen-faced, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. He knew she was telling the truth. "And Mr. Lucas's car?" the prosecutor asked. "The elephant. It seemed furious with the car. It attacked it, with its trunk, with its feet. It crushed it, tore it, as if punishing it for what had been done. It was an incredible display of strength. I just watched, in shock and gratitude. And Mr. Lucas," the prosecutor continued, "he came back. I saw him running towards the car, shouting, but the elephant saw him, and the elephant chased him. Lucas tried to flee, but the animal was fast. It cornered him and held him there until the police arrived." The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. "Donna Ilara, do you have any doubt about what you saw that day?" "None. Every detail is etched in my memory. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't delirium, it was real, a miracle." The defense lawyer rose for cross-examination, visibly shaken, but determined to sow doubt. "Donna Ilara, you went through a terrible trauma. Being buried alive, dehydration, the extreme desert heat, all of that can cause hallucinations, can't it? Visions, delusions. Donna Ilara looked at him with an unwavering calm. I was afraid, yes, but my mind was clear. I wasn't delirious. I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. That elephant was as real as you are standing before me now. But an elephant in the desert. That's extraordinary, isn't it? Something science doesn't easily explain. Wouldn't it be more plausible that your mind, under extreme stress, created an image to cope with the terror? Science doesn't explain many things, Mr. Lawyer, but truth is truth. And the truth is, I was dying, and an elephant saved me. It gave me water. It destroyed my grandson's car. It prevented him from fleeing. The police found him trapped there, didn't they? The mention of Sergeant Almeida and Dr. Mendez, who had spoken of the uniqueness of the destruction and the absence of other explanations, resonated in the room. The defense was in trouble. Donna Ilara, do you have any history of mental health issues or vision or hearing problems that might have affected your perception of events? My mind is as sharp as it ever was, sir, and my eyes and ears work perfectly. I saw and heard everything clearly. The lawyer tried one more time. Don't you think that perhaps gratitude for being saved led you to idealize a savior, to create a more fantastic story, to make sense of something that would otherwise be inexplicable? Donna Ilara smiled, a small, serene smile. There is no idealization in thirst, sir. There is no fantasy in the sand that suffocated me. And there is no imagination in the water that brought me back to life. The truth is that life is full of mysteries, and some of them are more wonderful than we can conceive. The prosecutor, in his rebuttal, asked one final question. Donna Ilara, after everything that happened, do you still have feelings for your grandson, Lucas? She looked at Lucas, who now stared at her with a mix of terror and a strange plea. He is my grandson. I loved him, but what he did, that cannot be forgiven without justice. The truth needs to be told, so that no other elderly person suffers what I suffered, and so that the world knows that life and kindness can come from the most unexpected sources. The jury was visibly shaken. Donna Ilara's calm, the clarity of her memory, the consistency of her story with the forensic evidence and the sergeant's reports, all of it was breaking down the barriers of incredulity. The battle for logic was losing ground to the overwhelming force of a truth that, however fantastic, seemed increasingly real. The stage was set for the next revelation, and the air was charged with anticipation. The truth was slowly unfolding, layer by layer, and each new piece of evidence, however technical, seemed to whisper the same unbelievable story. The jury, once skeptical, now seemed divided between logic and the growing possibility of a miracle. The silence that followed Donna Ilara's last statement was not one of incredulity, but of deep reflection. Each jury member, each observer in the room, seemed to be processing not just the story, but the way it was told, with a dignity and conviction that defied cold logic. Truth, sometimes, didn't need tangible proof to be felt. It resonated in the soul. But this was a courtroom, and the law demanded more than just feelings. The prosecutor, with an almost imperceptible nod to his team, waited for the murmur to subside. He knew Donna Ilara had planted the seed of doubt in the jury's skepticism, and now it was time to water it with irrefutable evidence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice filling the air with renewed authority, "the prosecution calls its next witness, Dr. Aris Thorne." A middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses and an academic demeanor walked to the witness stand. Dr. Thorne was not a man of grand speeches, but his reputation as one of the foremost experts in biomechanics and animal impact analysis was unquestionable. He took the oath with the same seriousness as Donna Ilara and sat down, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the prosecutor. "Dr. Thorne," the prosecutor began, "could you please state your area of specialization and your experience relevant to this case?" "I hold a doctorate in biomechanics, with a focus on impact forces and their applications in forensic and environmental contexts," Dr. Thorne replied, his voice calm and measured. "For the past 15 years, I have worked extensively on analyzing damage patterns caused by large animals, both in natural environments and in accidents involving vehicles or structures." "And did you have the opportunity to examine the remains of the defendant, Lucas Montero's luxury vehicle, recovered from the incident site in the desert?" "Yes, I examined the vehicle in detail. I conducted a complete forensic analysis of the structural and superficial damage." "Could you please describe your findings, Dr. Thorne?" Dr. Thorne nodded, adjusting his glasses. "The vehicle, a high-end SUV, exhibited an extremely unusual damage pattern. It was not consistent with a vehicular collision, nor with an impact against rocks or any type of accident we could classify as typical. The force applied was massive, but localized in a very specific manner." He paused, and a prosecutor's assistant projected magnified images of the destroyed car onto the courtroom screen. The audience murmured, shocked by the extent of the devastation. "Observe here," Dr. Thorne pointed to a dented area of the car's roof. "The deformation is consistent with a vertical compression force exerted by a large and relatively flat surface, but with irregular contours. The estimated pressure is several thousands of kilograms per square centimeter at specific points, which is far beyond what a person could generate, even with tools." "And the sides of the vehicle?" the prosecutor asked. "On the sides, and especially at the rear, we found evidence of tensile and torsional forces. There are deep tears in the sheet metal and structural components, as if the material had been pulled and twisted. These marks are consistent with the action of an extremely strong and flexible appendage, capable of wrapping around and tearing off parts of the vehicle. The absence of sharp edges or metal fragments that would indicate the use of hand tools is notable." Lucas, in the defendant's box, was pale. He knew exactly what Dr. Thorne was describing. "Dr. Thorne, in your vast experience, what kind of force or creature could cause such a specific and devastating damage pattern?" Dr. Thorne looked at the jury, his expression serious. "Based on the biomechanical analysis of the damage, the magnitude of the forces involved, and the singular nature of the deformation and tearing patterns, the only plausible explanation that aligns with all physical evidence is the attack of a large animal, specifically an elephant." A shock ran through the room. The word, spoken by a respected scientist, resonated with a different weight. It was no longer the story of a traumatized elderly woman, but a scientific conclusion. "Can you elaborate, Dr. Thorne?" the prosecutor encouraged. "Certainly. The compression force on the roof and hood is consistent with an elephant's foot. The tensile and torsional marks with the strength and dexterity of its trunk. The way the vehicle was dismantled, not in a single impact, but in a series of coordinated attacks, crushing, tearing, pushing, is well-documented defensive or aggressive behavior in elephants when they feel threatened or provoked. No other known terrestrial animal possesses the combination of mass, strength, and manipulative ability to inflict this type of damage." The defense lawyer rose, visibly disturbed, but trying to maintain composure. "Dr. Thorne, are you asserting that an elephant caused this damage? In the desert, isn't that extraordinary? My function is to analyze the physical evidence and determine the most probable cause based on science," Dr. Thorne replied, unshakable. "The evidence from the vehicle unequivocally points to an elephant attack. The geographical location of the incident does not alter the nature of the forces that acted upon the car." But what about the possibility of another type of force? Heavy machinery, for example. A crane, perhaps. We examined that possibility. The marks are not consistent with the use of machinery. There are no crane claw marks nor impact patterns from demolition hammers. The distribution of force and the contact points are organic, not mechanical. Furthermore, the absence of any heavy equipment at the scene and the logistics of bringing such equipment to such a remote location without leaving traces make that hypothesis unsustainable. The defense lawyer tried once more, desperate. Dr. Thorne, are you not simply corroborating a fantastical story with a convenient interpretation of the facts? My interpretation is based on empirical data and principles of physics and biomechanics, Dr. Thorne replied firmly. The damage to the vehicle is a fact. My analysis is an attempt to explain these facts in the most scientifically rigorous way possible. And the conclusion, however unusual it may seem, is that an elephant was the causative agent. The jury was silent, but their eyes showed a new understanding. Donna Ilara's story, once a narrative of miracle, now had a pillar of science to support it. The tension in the room was palpable, as logic and the inexplicable merged into a truth increasingly terrifying for Lucas. The barrier of incredulity was crumbling, not by faith, but by evidence that, however bizarre, was becoming impossible to ignore. The silence that followed Dr. Thorne's declaration was no longer one of incredulity, but of reluctant acceptance. The cold logic of science, presented by an unquestionable expert, was now confronting the barrier of the impossible. Lucas, in the defendant's box, seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes, his face a mask of despair and contained rage. He knew that the truth was being unearthed, not by the confession he refused to give, but by the very nature he had tried to defy. The defense lawyer, Mr. Almeida, rose, his previously confident posture now tinged with palpable urgency. He needed to dismantle this new layer of evidence, or his client's case would be irremediably lost. "Dr. Thorne," Mr. Almeida began, his voice trying to sound firm, but with a note of tension. "You are a specialist in biomechanics, not in zoology or ecology, correct? My specialization is in the analysis of forces and impacts, yes," Dr. Thorne replied, unshakable. "But for that, it is necessary to understand the physical capabilities of the causative agents, be they machines or living organisms. And are you aware that the area where the incident occurred is an arid desert, not a typical habitat for elephants?" "I am aware of the geographical location," Dr. Thorne nodded. "However, my analysis is based on the damage observed in the vehicle. This damage is compatible with an elephant. The question of how an elephant got there is a separate investigation, but it does not invalidate the conclusion about the causative agent." Mr. Almeida pressed his lips together. "Don't you think that, by focusing exclusively on the damage and ignoring the environmental context, your conclusion becomes forced? An attempt to fit the evidence into a narrative already established by the prosecution?" "My analysis was conducted independently," Dr. Thorne calmly retorted. "I received the vehicle and instructions to determine the cause of the damage. My conclusions are based on empirical data and scientific principles, not on narratives. If the data points to an elephant, it is because the forces and damage patterns are uniquely consistent with that animal. To ignore this conclusion would be a scientific failure." "But what about the possibility of a different animal with similar strength? A rhinoceros, as I mentioned before, or perhaps disguised demolition equipment, or even an extreme natural event that simulated this damage?" "We have already addressed those hypotheses," Dr. Thorne patiently explained. "A rhinoceros would cause impact and puncture damage, not the tensile and torsional patterns observed. Demolition equipment would leave distinct mechanical marks, absent here, and natural events, such as sandstorms or rockfalls, do not generate the combination of localized compression and articulated dismantling that the vehicle sustained. The only explanation that aligns with all damage patterns is an elephant attack. Mr. Almeida tried one last gambit, his voice almost a whisper of despair. "Dr. Thorne, can you state with 100% certainty that no other agent, known or unknown, could have caused this damage?" Dr. Thorne looked at the jury, his expression serious and thoughtful. "In science, 100% certainty is rare. There is always a margin for what we do not yet understand. However, based on all current scientific knowledge regarding biomechanics, impact forces, and animal capabilities, the probability of it having been an elephant is so high that I consider it the only plausible and sustainable conclusion. The physical evidence is overwhelming." The prosecutor, seeing the defense exhausted, rose for redirect examination. "Dr. Thorne, in summary, does your scientific analysis corroborate Donna Ilara's story about the elephant's rescue?" "My analysis corroborates that the damage to the defendant's vehicle was caused by an elephant," Dr. Thorne stated categorically. "The implications of that for the rest of the story are a matter for the jury to consider in conjunction with other evidence." With that, Dr. Thorne was dismissed, leaving behind a trail of shock and a new layer of conviction in the courtroom. The jury, once skeptical, now seemed divided between logic and the growing possibility of a miracle. Donna Ilara's story, once a narrative of miracle, now had a pillar of science to support it. The prosecutor, with an almost imperceptible smile, knew he had planted the seed of doubt in the jury's skepticism, and now it was time to water it with irrefutable evidence. He paused dramatically, allowing Dr. Thorne's words to settle. Lucas's gaze, fixed on the prosecutor, was one of pure hatred and terror. "Your Honor," the prosecutor declared, his voice resonating with renewed confidence, "the prosecution calls its next witness, Dr. Ben Carter." A man younger than Dr. Thorne, with a neatly trimmed beard and an adventurous air, walked to the witness stand. Dr. Carter was a renowned ethologist, a specialist in large mammal behavior, with decades of fieldwork in various wild regions of the world, including deserts and savannas. He took the oath with a calm that contrasted with the tension in the room, and sat down, his curious eyes scanning the jury. "Dr. Carter," the prosecutor began, "could you please state your area of specialization and your experience relevant to this case?" "I hold a doctorate in ethology, the study of animal behavior, with a particular focus on African and Asian elephants," Dr. Carter replied, his voice clear and engaging. "I have spent the last 25 years observing and documenting elephant behavior in their natural habitats, studying their social interactions, survival strategies, and, crucially, their responses to threats and environmental stress." "And did you have the opportunity to review Dr. Thorne's forensic reports, the photographs of the destroyed vehicle, and Donna Ilara's statements about the desert incident?" "Yes. I reviewed all the materials provided by the prosecution," Dr. Carter confirmed. "They were fascinating, to say the least." "Dr. Carter, based on your vast experience in elephant behavior, what can you tell us about the plausibility of an elephant acting in the manner described by Donna Ilara and causing the damage observed in the vehicle?" Dr. Carter paused, looking directly at the jury. "Elephant behavior is complex and often misunderstood. They are creatures of remarkable intelligence, with an empathetic and memory capacity that rivals our own. In situations of extreme stress, such as the prolonged drought affecting the region at the time of the incident, or the perception of a threat to themselves or others, their behaviors can be extraordinary." "Can you elaborate on that?" "Certainly. First, regarding the presence of an elephant in the desert, while unusual, it is not impossible. Elephants are known to travel long distances in search of water and food, especially during severe drought periods. There are records of elephants traversing semi-arid regions and even adapting to drier environments than their typical habitats. The search for fresh water can lead them to unexpected locations, and their ability to detect underground water is legendary. And what about the behavior of saving Donna Ilara and destroying the car? That is even more intriguing, but not entirely unprecedented, Dr. Carter continued, the room now in complete silence, absorbing every word. Elephants have a profound aversion to seeing other living beings in suffering, especially if they perceive a connection or a threat. The act of digging for water for a companion or even for an animal of another species has been documented. An elephant's trunk is an organ of incredible sensitivity and dexterity, capable of performing delicate tasks like plucking a single leaf or applying massive force to fell a tree. And the destruction of the vehicle. If the elephant perceived the car as the source of Donna Ilara's suffering or as a direct threat, its response would be one of protection and aggression. Dr. Thorne's analysis of the damage is perfectly consistent with the strength and tactics of an enraged or protective elephant. Crushing with its feet, tearing and twisting with its trunk, it is typical defensive and offensive behavior. The idea that the elephant destroyed the cowardly grandson's luxury car to protect Donna Ilara, while it may seem like fiction, is entirely plausible within the behavioral repertoire of an elephant in a situation of extreme stress and perceived threat. The room was in complete silence. Science and nature were uniting to tell a story that before seemed impossible. Lucas, in the defendant's box, now looked like a man who had just seen his world collapse. The truth, however fantastic, was becoming undeniable. The stage was set for the next revelation, and the air was charged with anticipation. The barrier of incredulity was crumbling, not by faith, but by evidence that, however bizarre, was becoming impossible to ignore. The prosecutor, with a nod, encouraged Dr. Carter to continue, delving deeper into the giant's mind. Dr. Carter, you mentioned elephants' aversion to suffering and their capacity for discernment. Could you explain how an elephant might have perceived the car as the source of Donna Ilara's suffering, or even as an instrument of a cruel act? Dr. Carter adjusted himself on the stand, his voice gaining an almost narrative intensity. Elephants are keen observers. They process sensory information with incredible detail. The scent of stress, the sound of despair, the sight of a living being in a situation of extreme vulnerability, all of this is captured and interpreted. In Donna Ilara's case, buried alive, her anguish would be palpable to an elephant. And if the vehicle was present at the moment she was left there, or if the elephant witnessed the interaction, however brief, between the defendant and the victim, the car could have been associated with the act of cruelty. Are you suggesting that the elephant made a connection between the car and the intent to cause harm? The prosecutor asked, his voice low but laden with meaning. I am not attributing human intentions to the elephant, Dr. Carter corrected calmly but firmly. I am stating that they are capable of forming complex associations. If an object or an individual is consistently linked to a source of danger or suffering, an elephant can react to that object or individual protectively or aggressively. There are numerous accounts of elephants holding grudges against specific hunters or showing affection for caregivers who saved them. Their memory is legendary, and their ability to learn and adapt is extraordinary. So, to an elephant, the defendant's luxury car could have been more than just an inanimate object? Exactly. It could have been perceived as a symbol or an instrument of the threat to Donna Ilara. The destruction of the vehicle in this context would not be a random act of animal vandalism, but a deliberate response of protection and, yes, of neutralizing the perceived threat. The act of delicately digging the sand to rescue the lady and then the fury directed at the car demonstrates a sequence of actions that suggests discernment and a clear purpose. So, would any car in the desert be a potential target if an elephant saw someone in danger nearby? Mr. Almeida pressed, searching for a flaw in the logic. Not necessarily, Dr. Carter retorted. The specificity of the response suggests a direct connection to the event. If the elephant associated that car with the act of burying Dona Ilara, the destruction would be targeted. It's not indiscriminate aggression, but a response to a perception of cause and effect. It's the difference between a predator attacking out of hunger and an animal defending its territory or a member of its group. Mr. Almeida hesitated, realizing that every attempt to discredit Dr. Carter only reinforced the complexity and plausibility of the scenario. Elephants were not mere instinctive robots. Dr. Carter, the prosecutor intervened on redirect with a final tone, in your vast experience, have you ever witnessed or documented elephant behaviors that could be described as saving a living being and punishing the aggressor? Dr. Carter looked at the jury, his eyes conveying the seriousness of his conviction. Yes, not with the cinematic exactness that Donna Ilara's story presents, but the individual components, the search for water for a being in distress, the protection of the vulnerable, aggression directed at perceived threats, the memory of events and individuals. All of these are well-documented and studied behaviors. What we have here is an extraordinary convergence of these behaviors, amplified by the situation of extreme stress and the heinous nature of the crime. It is a testament to the intelligence, empathy, and strength of these animals that, in moments of crisis, can transcend what we consider normal and act in ways that force us to re-evaluate the very definition of life and consciousness. The room remained silent for a long moment after Dr. Carter's words. The barrier of incredulity had been completely torn down. It was no longer a question of if an elephant could have done that, but of how nature had responded to such a profound act of cruelty. Lucas, in the defendant's box, no longer seemed merely desperate but utterly annihilated. The truth, however fantastic, was now undeniably before everyone, sealed not only by the victim's testimony, but by the relentless logic of science and nature itself. The prosecutor, with a smile of contained triumph, knew the jury was ready for the next and perhaps most impactful revelation. Lucas's fate was sealed, not by a miracle, but by the undeniable evidence of one. The prosecutor rose, his imposing figure filling the space. There was no longer any need for witnesses. The narrative was complete. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice resonating with a gravity that captured every soul present. "You have heard, you have seen, you have witnessed the story of Donna Ilara, a woman abandoned to die in a way that defies human comprehension. Buried alive under the merciless desert sun by her own grandson, Lucas, whose sole motive was the most abject greed." He paused dramatically, allowing the image of the helpless elderly woman and the scorching desert to fix in everyone's minds. And then, what happened? Nature, in its inscrutable wisdom, intervened. An elephant, a being that, according to science, possesses empathy, intelligence, and a protective instinct that transcends species barriers. This elephant not only found Donna Ilara, but saved her. It dug the sand with a delicacy that brutally contrasts with the brutality of the defendant. It hydrated her with fresh water from its trunk, an act of compassion that shames human cruelty. And then it destroyed the instrument of the crime, the luxury car that symbolized the defendant's wealth and arrogance. It was not an accident. It was not a coincidence. It was a response from nature to injustice. The prosecutor pointed at Lucas, who cringed in the defendant's box, his eyes fixed on the floor, the image of a broken man. Mr. Almeida tried to discredit the story, tried to sow doubt, but doubt was crushed, just like the defendant's car. The forensic evidence, the victim's testimony, Dr. Carter's behavioral analysis, everything converges to a single, irrefutable truth. Lucas attempted to murder his grandmother and was prevented by an act of divine intervention, or, as science has shown us, by an extraordinary act of a living being that values life more than the aggressor himself. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not just about a heinous crime. It is about the thin line between humanity and bestiality. It is about an animal's capacity to demonstrate a compassion that a man lacked. It is about justice that at times manifests in ways that surpass our wildest imagination. Lucas not only committed a crime against Donna Ilara, he committed a crime against human decency itself, and nature in its wisdom rose to correct him. Mr. Almeida, the defense lawyer, rose for his rebuttal, but his voice was weak, his conviction crushed. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, trying to gather the fragments of his argument, "the defense acknowledges the gravity of the accusations. However, we still ask you to consider the possibility of mitigating circumstances. The story of the elephant, however explained, is still extraordinary, and the human mind, under pressure, can act in unpredictable ways." But his words sounded hollow, without force, without the passion the prosecution had demonstrated. He knew he was fighting a losing battle. The judge instructed the jury. The room was in a heavy silence, the anticipation almost palpable. The jury retired. Deliberation, which in other cases could take days, was surprisingly swift. In less than an hour they returned. The verdict was a formality, but the weight of each word was immense. "Has a verdict been reached?" the judge asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, Your Honor," replied the jury foreperson, her voice clear and unwavering. "Regarding the charge of aggravated attempted murder, how does the jury decide?" "Guilty." The word echoed in the room, a final and definitive sound. Lucas staggered, his knees giving way, and he would have fallen had it not been for the bailiffs who held him. His face was white, his eyes empty, terror now an inescapable reality. Arrogance, greed, contempt, all had been replaced by abject despair. The sentence was delivered without hesitation, given the heinous nature of the crime, the premeditation, and the cruelty. Lucas was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law for aggravated attempted murder. He would be immediately taken to prison, his world of luxury and privilege undone in an instant. The luxury car, once a symbol of his power, now lay as a twisted carcass in the desert, a monument to his depravity and to the intervention of a gentle giant. Donna Ilara, observing from her wheelchair, a handkerchief in hand, felt a profound peace. Justice had been served, not just by the law of men, but by something much greater. She knew she would live the rest of her days with the memory of that day in the desert, not as a nightmare, but as proof that life, in its most unexpected forms, always finds a way, and that compassion can emerge from where it is least expected. The elephant, the guardian of the desert, had become her guardian angel, a living reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the light of kindness can shine, guided by the trunk of a giant. The case of Lucas and Donna Ilara would become a legend, a whispered tale of human greed and the majesty of nature, a testament that sometimes justice has big feet and a powerful trunk. And so, the desert, which almost became a woman's tomb, transformed into the stage of a miracle where truth was unearthed and cruelty, finally, was crushed.